Hello there, welcome to Civilization VI Egypt playthrough part 2. Part 1 of this video went up about a month ago, in November anyway. Link in the video description and here in the video as well. Where I made one of my first sort of attempts to record a playthrough of a civilization. I, as you can see, was continuing my religious struggle against the Russians. I made a major effort actually to do religion in this version or this playthrough, but it didn't work out as well as I thought it might. Shall we say? So in part 1, I basically wiped out the Chinese and the Norwegians. The Chinese because they were too close. It was straightforward active aggression on my part, right at the very start. The Norwegians declared war on me, and I had only 2 cities at the time, and I had this substantial enough army left over from kicking out the Chinese. So I just upgraded it, modernized it using the cash reserves that I had, and kicked the Norwegians for touch. Did not have a major effect on me, I think, in terms of warmongering in the course of this game. And I managed to build up pretty good relationships with everybody early on. And I spent the next 100 turns, I think, mostly building up my cities, building up my economy and trying to take over Russia to establish my religion as the major religion in Russia. This essentially failed. And while I was doing it, the French established their religion as the religion in Greece, in particular, and a few other places, or at least they were contesting strongly against the other religious powers. So the French religion was actually a very strong position. The AI does, of course, have the advantage over me in that it knows which powers object to you proselytizing in their territories and which powers don't care. So while I was trying to take over, establish my religion in Russia, who did care, and the French were actually trying to take over me, and they actually did manage to convert Skedsmo a couple of times, and I managed to reconvert it back. And I wasn't doing so well on the religious conflict with the French. They seemed to have stronger in theological battles. I'm not 100% sure what drives these factors, whether it's the total strength of their religion, the total global following of their religion, or what. While I was seen to be stronger against the Russians. But religious conflict has a bigger impact on the faith the people in the nearby cities follow than actual direct proselytization by missionaries and apostles. So winning a religious battle and wiping out an enemy missionary unit with your apostles or inquisitors can actually swing the balance of religious belief in a particular city, or in 3 or 4 cities together, much more quickly and efficiently in some respects than actual going around sending missionaries to each individual city to convert by the spreading the religion action. So I did take advantage of the fact that I'd managed to get ahead on eras on the French to the point where I could declare a colonial war. And I thought if I snapped up Rien, I could reduce the religious pressure on my empire, and I'd put the French on a bit of a backstep. Plus, I could use military units to substitute to kill French religious units in ways, because if you occupy a hex occupied by an enemy religious unit that you're at war with, you can then arrest the heretic and eliminate the unit. Whereas normally military units do not interact with religious units when you're not at war with the power that owns the religious units. Meanwhile, the attempts to proselytize in Russia just didn't work out. I would take over many Russian cities, but I wouldn't make it stick. The Russians would re-establish their religion in the interval while I was building up the necessary faith points to recruit more apostles and missionaries. And this kind of makes sense because it's much cheaper to recruit inquisitors than it is to recruit apostles and missionaries. And they don't seem to go up as quickly in price as apostles and missionaries go up as well. Plus, you don't seem to need them as much. If you keep the religious pressure strong within your empire and you have spread your religion fairly early, a small or judicious use of inquisitors can seem to shift the balance in your own cities fairly quickly. So, and also, like I said, if you defeat the opposition missionaries coming in, that is even more dramatic and more effective way of defending your religion than direct action against the cities. War against France was easy enough. The AI's ability to fight war still isn't that great. It's I don't know if it's better than in 5th edition. It might be, but I don't know if it's much better. I think it's easy enough. The biggest problem is that what I found against France, for instance, one of the biggest obstacles I had was that Leventa, the black crossbowmen there, they had just a ton of crossbowmen. And they actually caused me more trouble than the French military forces did. Taking cities, though, can be hard, depending on where the encampments are. A city that's in restricted terrain, backed up by encampments, can be very, very difficult proposition to take, as I found out later on. The other thing, though, about taking cities is that it penalises your diplomatic relationships in the long run. And I'm not 100% sure if it's worth it in the normal course of events. It is very different to previous versions of Civilization in that not only does the state that you take the city off hold a permanent grudge against you for occupying one of their cities, and therefore you're at a constant diplomatic disadvantage with those people. But if they build up a good diplomatic relationship to the point of friendship or alliance with other players, those players will take up their grudges on your behalf, or on their behalf. And therefore you can find yourself in a situation simply because you've occupied cities in a civilization that was allied to or friends with another civilization, that the other civilization is constantly denouncing you as a warmonger and generally treating you as a pariah. And this is something that you might not want, depending on your how it is you're planning to win the game, and how dependent you are on trade between civilizations for raw materials and or materials to keep your happiness and stuff like that going. So it can be a problem. I did realize earlier on that I wasn't going to win this game religiously, and I wasn't going to win it by score. I was ahead for a substantial amount of the game. I was ahead of the Greeks on score, but it was quite obvious that the Greeks were going to beat me. They were going to beat me out of on a what do you call it? A culture victory, or they were going to beat me on science. And for a long time it looked like they were going to beat me on culture, but eventually I did manage to pull the culture up to the point where they gave up on the idea of a cultural win, but they were definitely going to beat me on science. So I thought there was enough chance that I might be able to pull off a domination victory. I wasn't too sure. But what I was kind of hoping was that I'd seen happen in 5th edition, whereas if you had taken a couple of capitals, one of the more militaristic civilizations, Spain, for instance, as an example. I can't remember whether Spain was in this game or not. Well, they were in the game, but I don't think they were a big power. But some of the more militaristic civilizations can go on a kind of capital stealing race. Now, I'm not 100% sure whether the victory conditions give the impression that you need to occupy all capitals, but I know in Civ V you basically needed to be the only one with your original capital. That if all other civilizations had lost their capitals to other civilizations, the guy that still owned his capital won. So if the Greeks, say, were the only ones with their capital besides me, and I took the Greek capital, I would win the game. So I decided to have a go at the Russian capital. But it turned out I couldn't actually take the Russian capital. I was able to take the city here in front of it, but by the time I had that city taken, it was a much tougher proposition than taking the French cities, because the Russians weren't actually that far behind me on technology. So their city defences were a lot higher, and also their cities were better defended. They had more defensive features. And they had made use of encampments, and the terrain around them was pretty restricted, so that also the limited number of units that I did land were constantly being attacked, even though they were being attacked by low technology units that had no hope of beating them. They did wear them down, and I lost quite a few units in that way. So by the time it was all finished, I wasn't really in a position to take St. Petersburg, at least not at that point of the game, and I didn't really have the time left, because I ran into another difficulty after the Russian thing. It was pretty obvious that I was losing on the space race, and that I needed to up my technology level. So I thought that upping my technology level was a bigger priority, and I thought that I probably needed better tech anyway, just even to take on the Greeks. And I switched back to democracy, because in previous versions of Civ, democracy was a good government form to have if you wanted to build up or have a lot of science, whereas communism was more production focused, whereas fascism was more war focused, that kind of thing. Fascism reduced war weariness, but communism had very good war fighting capabilities, but also pretty good production capabilities. And I decided to go back to democracy. But because I had already had democracy, and I think because I didn't pick a free government change turn, I went into anarchy, and the anarchy bankrupted me. And the bankruptcy caused rebels to appear, and the rebels destroyed buildings and amenities in cities. So I was losing amenities and housing. The rebels were then killing more amenities and housing, which spawned more rebels around more cities. So this became a death spiral. It took me a couple of turns to realize how bad a death spiral I was in, and then several more turns to deal with it, and finished up having to more or less disband every unit that I had. And once that I had disbanded most of my units, I was able to recover income. And once I was in a position to recover income, I stopped losing amenities due to lack of maintenance. And then I was just able to gradually whittle down the rebels, so they stopped destroying further amenities, and I did stabilize my economy and recover somewhat at the end of the day. But it was a very painful experience, and it really, I was able to do nothing. I was gaining no ground at all for 20, 30 turns, maybe more, as much as 50 turns, which is a substantial portion of the game to be knocked out of action. It really is a death spiral. It's to be avoided at all costs, because you're also losing traders. The rebels would kill any trader that passed through them. So you were losing traders, you were losing amenities, you were losing housing, which was then spawning more rebels, which was then killing traders, killing housing, killing amenities. You can see how it went. I didn't lose any cities outright. I did finish up giving away Marseille, for instance, back to the French, because I just, it was a city I didn't really need. And I've played another game since, and yeah, I'm beginning to wonder, are keeping cities from enemies worth it, unless the city is particularly valuable or in a particularly good strategic location. And I think just taking cities because you can and hanging on to them might not be worth it. It's not like in the other games where they kind of convert over, or the other civ becomes reconciled, their loss over several eras. They just seem to hold it as a grudge, and their neighbours can then take it up as a grudge as well. And yeah, it can become a real diplomatic problem and a millstone around your neck. So capitals are obviously worth, if you get your hands on one, swiping, but I'm not sure if it's worth doing the whole lot. And I'm not even sure if it's worth wiping out. You can run into the same trouble wiping out entire civilizations. Their former allies can still remember them and hold it against you. So now you can mitigate it obviously by giving gifts or building up a strong relationship with the other powers before you go to war, in which case the war will reduce you maybe from a close friendship down to a more neutral status. But you know, warmongering is supposed to decay over time. I haven't noticed that it does. Usually when I get the warmonger label thrown at me so far in this game, in the games that I've played, it hasn't gone away. But then I haven't been, or I hadn't researched it in any great deal. So I don't know how much to make it stick. The other thing I'm still having trouble with is generating great people. I don't seem to be able to do as much of it as the AIs are doing. Obviously, it requires building the right kinds of buildings and building the right kinds of districts. Now, what I have learned is that the districts are key to population. So you can build one district at a fairly low population, and you can build multiple districts, then more districts require greater population. So as you can see, I lost. I lost the science race. I was doing okay in many of the metrics, but I just wasn't doing as well at the key times. I think some of the other civilizations. It was very interesting and very good learning experience. I did learn quite a bit from it, and I hope you found this interesting. And as an overview, thank you for watching. Please consider giving the video a like and the channel a subscription, and I will catch you all again soon.